right. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome to the virtual book launch party for The Last Trial of T. Boone Pickens. This is the first virtual book launch party I think any of us have done. So we're going to be a little experimental tonight. My name's Amy Hunt, and I'm going to my whole job is just to keep things going tonight. We're going to be hearing from the authors, Krista and Loren, and we'll be taking questions at the end, but if you have any questions in the meantime, please feel free to put them into the chat button and we'll address them at the end. We will also have a special offer at the end that Loren's going to tell you all about. So in the meantime, we're going to just start out with a quick summary for those of you who may not be intimately familiar with the book. So in November 2016, former corporate raider and legendary oil man, T. Boone Pickens, entered Reeves County Courthouse in tiny Pecos, Texas, known for being the home of Judge Roy Bean and not much else. Pickens had made and lost billions over his long career, and he was suing another legendary Texas oil company, accusing them of cutting him out of what became the biggest oil play he ever invested in. To lead his legal fight, Pickens chose an unlikely advocate. Krista Castaneda was a Dallas solo practitioner. She had recently returned to the practice of law after a hiatus that also saw her running as a Democrat for public office. Pickens was a hardline Republican, more used to working with big law firms. The two, however, shared an unwavering determination to win and formed a friendship that spanned their differences in age, politics, and gender. The trial lasted nearly 5 weeks, with Pickens, Castaneda, and the rest of the legal team holed up in a very interesting Swiss-themed hotel in Pecos. Pickens sat through trial every single day, and he was determined to prevail even at the cost of his own health. The Last Trial of T. Boone Pickens tells the story of this high-stakes courtroom drama through the eyes of Castaneda. It's the story of an American business legend still fighting in the twilight of his long career, and the woman determined to help him win justice. Krista Castaneda is an oil and gas trial attorney in Texas, here in Dallas. She formed her own boutique law firm in 2014 after more than 20 years as a lawyer in some of the world's top law firms. She's been recognized for her work by, among other publications, Texas Lawyer, the National Law Journal, the Dallas Business Journal, and D Magazine. She's currently a Democratic primary candidate for the Texas Railroad Commission, the state's oil and gas regulatory agency, which I'm sure everyone on this call knows. And she's on the ballot in the runoff on July 14th. Loren Steffy is a journalist. He is the author of 3 other books: George P. Mitchell, Fracking, Sustainability, and an Unorthodox Quest to Save the Planet, Drowning in Oil, BP and the Reckless Pursuit of Profit, and The Man Who Thought Like a Ship. He is the former Dallas bureau chief of Bloomberg News and a former reporter at the Houston Chronicle and the dearly departed Dallas Times-Herald. So, with that introduction, Krista, tell us who some of our special guests are tonight.
Absolutely. We got lots of special guests. Well, in addition to my co-author, we have David Cole right there in Pecos, Texas, my appellate guru, never work without an appellate guru. We have Rodney Swords, who told me that he would not do that final set of calculations unless I threatened him again, and I didn't, and we went to trial. He was a great expert. Thank you, Rodney. We have the inimitable Andres Correa, now sporting a full beard. We have, we have Dee Batts, who was our paralegal at trial and was fabulous. We have Kara Guiot, who was my paralegal during trial, and she was fabulous. We have Kathy Maloney, also a paralegal at trial, also fabulous. We have Jay Rosser, the mastermind behind it all. You can't see him because he's a mastermind. He won't let himself be seen in public. We have, am I missing anybody? who was in, oh, there he is, that was involved in the trial. I just want to thank everybody for coming on and being a part of this story. It's your story. And so I just wanted to make sure everybody knows who you are. So everybody who was in the trial, raise your hand. Because it was a cast of thousands. Thank you. Okay, so that's that, Amy.
Well, we wanted to also ask you to give us some of the basics of the story and your relationship with Pickens and how this event came to a pass.
Okay, so many of you lived the trial, obviously. Many of you have read the book. Some of you have not read the book, but even if you have read the book, I kind of want to tell you about my perspective on the book. So first, let me tell you how I came to write it. There were so many interesting characters and interesting, what I call vignettes during this 5-week trial in Pecos, Texas. And by the way, that's Pecos right behind my head. That I just thought it was a super interesting story and that it needed to be told. And then of course, you know, we had the legendary T. Boone Pickens involved, but I also thought that people needed to hear what a real trial was like. And so I tried to write what a real trial was like, and it's nothing like Law and Order. At the end, it kind of wrote itself because all I did was write down what I saw and talk to a few other people and ask them what they saw and go by the transcripts. But and then of course I had Loren to do all the hard stuff. So that's how the book came to be. But let me tell you what the book is about from my perspective. First of all, it's about a trial. It's about a land deal right there in Pecos, Texas, that spanned over 100 square miles, and it was what was known as an area of mutual interest deal, where Pickens was supposed to get 15% of everything that got bought and drilled in that AMI, and it's supposed to pay 15% of the costs, and he ended up getting dropped from the deal shortly after he entered it and didn't really realize it until 5 years later. And so we had a long, hard fight over whether you can get out of one of these deals with an oral opt-out. I heard the word opt-out, as did half the people on this call, about a kabillion times. So that's what it was about. It was about $1 billion land dispute. And it's about a backstory of how I came to be handling this case as said solo practitioner when they didn't know whether the case was worth very much. And so I took a look at it, and eventually we claimed that it was worth $1 billion and ended up with a $146 million verdict. It's about 1,000 small details and how you have to weave those 1,000 small details together. And it's about what the reality is of trying a huge commercial case. It's also about an oil town, and I want to highlight the fact that Pecos was kind of a special place. And I'll show you some of the scenes a little bit later of some of the things that happened in the book, but it was at the time at the height of the oil boom, and it was overloaded really with workers and landmen and roustabouts and trucks and trucks and trucks and trucks. It was about the people of Pecos, because we got to know a lot of people there living in the county for 5 weeks. And it was about a particular courtroom, a particular judge, and a particular set of court staff. The third, and maybe one of the most important things it was about a team. It was about an incredible trial team. It was about a young man who gave his first closing argument. It was about an appellate practitioner who I've known since law school, which is only 10 years ago. I can't even remember, but a long time. And it's about our relationship. It's about the experts like Rodney, who worked around the clock, and Ricardo Garza, a dear friend who was lost to a tragic accident. It was about everybody pulling their weight all the time. And I can't thank people enough for what they did and how they made this story come together. And then, of course, it was about a famous person named T. Boone Pickens, the man, the myth, the legend, corporate raider in his heyday. Most of you all know that in the 1980s. He was busy taking over companies and terrorizing Wall Street. And at the end of his life, at 88, he was seeking justice from 12 people in a small courtroom in a faraway, dusty place, coming to them for justice when juxtaposed to maybe sometimes he didn't mete out justice when he was a corporate raider. It's about his reliance on me, a woman, as he's 88 years old and used to dealing with the silk stocking firms at the on Wall Street. It's about the tale of a Republican who was a part of Swift Boat, and a Democrat who had run as a Democrat and was a full-bore Hillary supporter, and me putting him on the stand the day that she lost. It was about fighting for him and him fighting for himself through the fourth quarter of his life, even at the cost of his own health, but because he so believed that he needed to stand up for what he thought was right, and to keep pressing through the end of every bit of life that he had left. And it's about a very human person who I came to know really well and really appreciate and consider a dear friend. So that's what the book's about. All right, now I'm not gonna cry. I'm gonna take a glass of wine and say thank you for everybody for being here and turn it back over to Amy.
Thank you. Thank you. Enjoy your wine. So Loren, how did you get roped into this?
Yeah, well, there was a bit of roping involved. I had, as a business reporter, I had written about Boone Pickens going back to, gosh, I think the late 1980s or maybe it was 1990. But, I had written about him on and off for many, many years, and kind of seen all sides of his story from, the late 80s, kind of right as the takeover days were winding down, to, his move to Dallas, losing his company Mesa, restarting, starting over at age 67, starting his hedge fund, making an even bigger fortune, the whole bit. And I always thought he was a fascinating character. One of the great things, if you were a reporter, was that Boone was always very, very accessible. He was always willing to take time to talk to people in the press, which, a lot of business leaders, a lot of CEOs aren't. And so, he always made for a great story. And, as we were kind of talking about this, well, the kind of the thing that came up was in 2018, I guess it was, Jay Rosser, who's on this call, offered me a chance to go out to Boone's Ranch in West Texas to write a story. I wanted to write a story for Texas Monthly. They had decided to sell the ranch. He had decided to sell the ranch. And I wanted to go out there and write a story about it and really kind of capture the essence of the place, because to me, the ranch was kind of the living embodiment of Boone's personality. There was so much of him in that property, and not to be lost on the fact that the property itself is huge, right? It's 100 square miles, which is also kind of fitting with his larger than life personality. And so, when Boone took people to the ranch, he usually didn't like to take one or two people. He liked to take a group, and Krista was in that group. So I think that was the first time we met. We got to shoot a little skeet. She put me to shame. She put all of us to shame, actually. Although in fairness, the instructor did get stung by a bee and have to go find an EpiPen. So, we didn't get quite the careful instruction that she did. But anyway, so that kind of led to a discussion that started, it kind of continued over time, but I guess about a year ago, we really started working on the book in earnest. And, as a writer, a lot of people come to you and say, hey, I want to do a book. And I've learned that you just kind of say, yeah, okay, well, start writing some stuff, send me something, we'll see how it goes. And usually you never hear from them again. And I guess even though I'd spent a little time with Krista, I didn't know her well enough to know that pages were going to be coming very quickly. And so sure enough, they started showing up, and I started looking at them, and they were really good. I'm not sure I agree with her assessment that it wrote itself. I seem to remember a lot of blood and sweat, tearing my hair out, but removing a lot of spaces after periods and stuff. But it really was, you could see the story almost immediately. I mean, it really did kind of come alive, and I got very excited, because one of the challenges for me as a reporter, if I were to write about this story as just another court case, I don't know that it would be terribly exciting. I don't know that aside from people who were directly involved, there would have been a tremendous appeal. But being able to tell the story through Krista's eyes and actually put the reader in the courtroom and inside her head and what she was thinking as she was going through all this really was a great way to get into the story. And I think that, as she kind of already indicated, we really get to see a side of Boone Pickens that the public wasn't terribly familiar with. And so to me, as somebody who had written about him for 30 years or whatever it was, that was the exciting part of it too, was I got to explore sort of another side of this character that I'd already written about pretty extensively. So I'll throw it back to you, Amy. I think I've rambled on long enough now.
Thank you. Well, I mean, I think we're all here for one thing, and that's a tour of the Swiss Chalet. Krista, can you take us?
I will indulge you. Okay, hang on just a minute. I'm going to share my screen, and then I'm going to show some pictures. And for some of us, it will be old home week or flashbacks if you have PTSD. So this is the scrub that is Pecos. D-Bats took this photo, and Pickens and I drove through this territory at one point. He'd fly us all in on his private jet, and then we'd drive because invariably we'd have to land someplace other than where we were holding court that day. And he drove me out here, and he commented, as he would, that, Krista, this is why God put oil out here. There's nothing out here but scrub brush and cactus. And I want to point out my signature issue right there. See that flare? You see 1,000 of them when you go out there at night. It's a little surreal. Those who've driven through there see, they're just these huge torches that are always on fire. So, Pecos. This, they say, is the Pecos River. Texas Monthly, and I question the veracity of Texas Monthly, says that this is actually on the Pecos River, which I experienced as more the size of a drainage ditch. It's very, very unimpressive, but it is the Pecos River, and we were engaged in the law west of the Pecos, as Amy said. That's the man. That was actually a leased plane, because by this point in time he had sold his jet, and he came here. Our local council, Bill Weinacht, said, Krista, we don't get a lot of billionaires out here. This is when he flew in for the trial. Bills. We don't get a lot of billionaires out here. Call the papers, make sure that they know that T. Boone Pickens is landing at the airport. So we took some pictures and we got those to the local paper. There's Mike Lynn and Debbie Eberts, and I think Mike's making her load his luggage into one of our many vans and SUVs. Here is one of our war rooms. You see us all talking about something terribly important, who knows what, or maybe we're just listening to David Cole expound on the law, or maybe we're listening to Mike expound on his multiple trials. I don't know what this particular one is about, but we're all deep in thought, and we would spend most of our time in the courtroom during the day, and then most of our time in a room like this during the evenings. That is the Pecos County, the Reeves County Courthouse in Pecos, Texas. I think David figured out it must have been built in the 30s or 40s, and it has a lot of World War I memorabilia hanging around it. There is the infamous Best Western Swiss Chalet Hotel with its appropriate cacti out in the front, which it looks nothing at all like Switzerland, but they have a affinity for Swiss related themes. It's actually the best hotel in town, and it was actually a pretty good place to spend 5 weeks. We were lucky to have it. This is the entry. This is the foyer, and this is the couch where there's one scene where Mike Lynn and I are sitting on a couch talking to one of the defense counsel about could we try to settle this case, at which time, after reporting that to T. Boone, he says, Krista, you don't rush the monkey. You'll see a better show. He was not going to settle this case until he had seen the whole show. So we did not settle that evening. Note the spiral staircase, which is actually quite steep and a little terrifying. I never climbed it much, but it was definitely a presence in that entryway. You don't see a whole lot of Swiss themed stuff, but you do see quite a few various potted plants of Western nature. This is the breakfast room, and we've got a scene or two talking about T. Boone holding court in this breakfast room. We would gather down here every day. By the way, it's the best Mexican breakfast around. Every day they would have like migas or, something like that, good refritos. Pickens would eat, but he'd also talk to all the landmen and the roustabouts who had assembled there at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and just talk to them about what they were doing. And he loved that. He really loved doing that. And I think they were really impressed by him, that he was so down to earth with them. This is the famous conference room from chapter 1. Those of us who were there remember it well. It's a scene of a shouting match between me and Pickens, and the door is kind of behind you as you're looking into this scene. I think I was sitting right here, and Pickens was sitting right there, and Mike Lynn was here or here. If you haven't read the chapter, you'll have to read the chapter, but it was one of the most notable experiences of my legal career. This is the whole team. Aren't they pretty? This is our celebratory victory after we won the trial. It's at Christmas time, and we were having dinner at Mike's invitation at the Crescent Club in Dallas. That's Mike Lynn. There's David. That's Pat Disbennett, one of Mike David's associates. Debbie Eberts, Andres Correa, Kathy Maloney, who's one of the paralegals on the case, and Dee Janice and Karen Wiat, all paralegals on the case, and me, of course. So that was the team, and a couple of legal assistants from the Lynn Pinker firm. So I wanted to also show you a few pictures of this ranch that Loren was talking about, and it is the scene of chapter 2 of the book. We're driving around the ranch, and Pickens is recounting a lot of the scenes from his life. These are the water features that Pickens built. There is an actual working Roman aqueduct here. It's quite impressive, and this territory is extremely dry territory, but he managed to tap the river and build a series of, I think, 24 lakes. This is I think this is called the Lake House. This isn't the main lodge where we stayed. This is a little 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 foot Italianate mansion that is several miles from the main mansion. You need an auxiliary mansion when you get to Pickens' stature. This is the scene where, this is the doghouse, and this is where Pickens gets out of the car and says, Krista, you know you're rich when you have a 4,800 square foot doghouse. And this doghouse was air conditioned and housed 40 or so hunting dogs. This is his boyhood home that he picked up from Oklahoma and moved to the ranch. And that's him climbing the stairs to go inside. It's only a 2-bedroom home. It's quite humble, but at the same time, if you consider it from the perspective of the Great Depression, it was kind of a pretty nice place. There's Loren shooting.
Can I just say something about the house?
Yeah.
That was really an amazing, on that trip, I actually, interviewing Boone in the house, his memory, he was starting to have some issues with his memory and stuff at that point. But when he sat down in the chair of the living room in his boyhood home, the stories just started flowing, and it was really an amazing experience to hear him talking about everything. And we spent quite a bit of time there just listening to him tell stories of his childhood. It was really kind of, he really came alive in there. So anyway, sorry.
No, that's good. That's good. He did. That's you shooting skeet. I thought you'd appreciate that one.
Not well, but.
This is the two authors standing in front of one of the oil wells that was being drilled on the ranch that day. So there are actual working oil wells on this ranch, which, by the way, is, yeah, big.
64.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you. And by the way, it's called Mesa Vista Ranch. And if you want to see much better photography, go to Mesa Vista Ranch on the internet. That's the chapel he built, and it's really a very contemplative place, quite beautiful. And that's the man himself and me in his study on that trip. So that, I think, is the slideshow. I think I'm supposed to do a small reading from the book, am I not?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
this was actually picked by my co-author. I'm not sure it's my favorite passage in the book, but he seems to find it memorable, so we'll roll with it. All right, so it's chapter 15, Growing Frustration. We ate lunch across the street from the courthouse at Bill Weinach's offices, which also served as our daytime war room. Over the course of the trial, this would become our daily routine, a brief interlude from the proceedings where we could discuss strategy or just talk about something else. Sometimes Mike Lynn or Pickens would entertain us with war stories on a host of subjects, oil-related or not. Pecos didn't have a lot of restaurants in 2016, and the few it did have were usually jammed with oil field workers at lunchtime. So one of the paralegals would order food, and we'd all share pizza or Subway sandwiches. Pickens could be remarkably unpretentious for a billionaire. He may have been accustomed to private jets and multi-million-dollar houses, but he never complained about eating fast food takeout or staying at a Best Western hotel. I never got the sense that any of it bothered him. In fact, he'd almost always insist that we stop by the local Dairy Queen to get his favorite treat, a Blizzard soft-serve dessert, usually with Butterfinger pieces blended in. It was my favorite too. After lunch, we made our way back to the courtroom and settled into our respective places. It was time for the defense to present their opening statements. Later in the trial, the defense attorneys kept interrupting us with objections, and time and again, the judge would call us to the bench to discuss these matters out of the jury's earshot. Law and order never shows the endless bench conferences between attorneys and judges in a business trial. Jurors can get confused by the countless arguments and objections, and they may not realize that certain things that the lawyers say are saying fall outside a jury's purview. Even worse, sometimes jurors can be swayed by what's said, even if they're not supposed to be. That's why these conferences are held at the bench in what is known as a sidebar conference. I dreaded these front of the room huddles, and not just because they disrupted our presentation. As many as a dozen of us would squeeze shoulder to shoulder next to the bench, whispering to the judge about our arguments. Some of the male attorneys, I couldn't say which ones, had worn their wool suits repeatedly between dry cleanings. Even though it was November, temperatures were still in the 80s in the early days of the trial. We were in a courtroom built before the advent of modern ventilation, and even at 5'7" I was shorter than most of the men packed around me. Men can get away with wearing the same suits day after day, but when those days are spent in a stuffy courtroom in the heat of a Texas Sodom, every conference meant me squeezing into a scrum of odoriferous suits, struggling to hear sotto voce discussions about legal minutiae. During one such gathering, as I leaned in to hear the argument that Stuart Hollowan was making in his soft, deliberate way of speaking, a loud cracking sound echoed through the courtroom. Alarmed, I bolted upright, but even before I turned around to look where the noise came from, I knew what happened. Pickens was grinning like a mischievous child, and several of the jurors were smiling. I'd seen him pull this stunt before, though never in open court. When no one was watching, he would slip an empty water bottle under his collar. Then he pretended to have neck problems. He'd grab the back of his neck with one hand and pull the other on the top of his head, pulling his head to one side as if he were popping his neck. And as he did so, he'd crunch the plastic bottle. It always got a laugh, including from me the first couple of times I saw it, but this time I was mortified. Swanson, that was the judge, already seemed to be ruling against us, and most judges don't take kindly to shenanigans in their courtroom. I'd warned Pickens to be on his best behavior to the point that I sounded like I was lecturing my sons when they were in junior high. But he was incapable of following directions that ran counter to his instincts. For decades, he'd faced business partners, lawyers, irate shareholders, intransigent managers, and people on the other side of deals. He could tell when to use humor to lighten the mood and when to be serious. And as he sat there, watching us whisper among ourselves, he realized that the jurors were getting tired of the constant calls to bench. He decided to use his little nick-cracking stunt to ease their frustration and at the same time develop a bond with them. He saw them as bored kids sitting at the back of the classroom, and Pickens was the class clown. I would have never condoned such a tactic, but of course this was T. Boone Pickens. He wasn't used to asking permission. I just hope he hadn't miscalculated. So a little bit of chapter 15.
All right, so I've got a couple of questions, and then we can move on to some questions from the audience. And Krista, what kind of client was T. Boone Pickens?
Oh, he was a challenge. In some ways, he was the very best client, and one of the best clients I've ever had, if not the best client. You know, the water bottle scene notwithstanding, he had his own ideas about stuff, but usually he was spot on. You know, he was a geologist. He had decades of experience doing what we were talking about. He was invested. I mean, I can't stress enough how important it is when you have a client who is gonna have you try a multi-billion, multi-million, multi-$100 million case. They have to be all in. And that means not just with paying the bills, which he always did, but also with their knowledge, their expertise, and making sure that the team was on it as well. So he was a lot of things, but one of the things he was a really great client.
Loren, tell me a little bit about the process of researching and writing the book.
Well, you know, as I mentioned, you know, I did go out to Pecos and stayed in the Swiss chalet for a few days, and you know, just to kind of get a feel for the place. And you know, Krista almost immediately sent me, I don't know, a few million pages of trial transcripts, I think. And you know, I did actually read through you know, the transcripts and try to get a kind of a sense for the trial and what was happening. You know, but really a lot of the research came sort of at her direction. You know, I mean, she really kind of knew how the trial unfolded, and it was sort of a process of deconstructing the trial. You know, the great thing about using a trial as a narrative thread is that it's very linear, right? But the problem is you got to hold the reader's attention through the whole thing. So one of the challenges was trying to figure out what was actually relevant to the story and what was just interesting to other lawyers, you know? And so there was we had a lot of back and forth discussions about that, what needed to be in there, what we could leave out, that sort of thing. And I think that occupied a lot of the kind of the early back and forth on the manuscript. And then of course we had, you know, the chapter on Boone himself, where, you know, I pulled a lot of the research that I had done over the years on his background and whatnot. And we actually, we talked a lot about how to frame that chapter. And then we realized the answer was right in front of us, which was, you know, we had both been to the ranch, and that was kind of where this all started. And so we used the ranch visit and us riding in the car with Boone as a way to kind of open up the narrative and tell the story about him, which I was particularly happy with when we hit on that. I thought we were really kind of struggling with how to work that chapter in, and then suddenly I think it just really kind of opened it up. So anyway, that was kind of the process.
Now, when you started this book, he was still alive. What was, Krista, tell me, what did he say when you told him you wanted to write this book?
Well, by the time we actually had it underway, he was not the same guy. So he always enjoyed us recounting the stories of what happened. He loved it when I would remind him of the water bottle story that I just read and how I was mortified about what the jury would do. He just would always get a kick out of the fact that he got one over on me. He loved it when there's a line when he's on the stand and the defense lawyer says, "Mr. Pickens, how you holding up?" And he says, "Well, I'm fine, Jeff, but I'm worried about you." And you know, when we'd recount little things like that, he would get a kick out of it. And so we didn't really get to talk all that much about the book itself, and he certainly never had an opportunity to read it. But I really think he would have enjoyed it if he had had the opportunity to read it.
Tell me a little bit about your anxiety about taking this case, given your differing demographics, to put it, to be euphemistic.
Oh yeah, well there is a chapter on that, right? So there were a lot of things. You know, I had been a partner in some of the largest law firms in the world. And that's how I first came to know T. Boone Pickens and his team. And, you know, I'd handled a matter for him before. And then when I decided to take a sabbatical and then return to the law, and his general counsel, Sandy Campbell, called me up and said, I think we might have a small little contract matter. Don't know if it's worth anything, but let's, you know, why don't you take a look at it? And very soon I knew not only was it worth a lot, but I also had a really, really strong gut feeling that we were going to try this case and we were going to win this case. And so that's a lot of pressure on a solo practitioner. A woman trial lawyer in the oil industry is a rare bird anyway. I could probably count on two hands how many others I know. And then it was a lot of pressure to think that they were going to actually let me take it through to trial, and worried that, you know, I might be replaced, because most other clients would probably say you need a big law firm. But the Pickens team was so amazing that way. You know, they trusted me, and they trusted me when I said, well, first we're going to hire David Cole, because I always want to go to trial with an appellate lawyer, and then we're going to bring on Mike Lynn and his team at Lynn Pinker, because it's a, you know, 5-week trial. You need 10 people at least, which is, we had a huge trial team. So they were great. I mean, I was anxious, but by the time I finally got to trial, and by the time we had that conference room scene, I was no longer anxious about my place and things. But yeah.
So before we get to a couple of questions and smart aleck comments from Jay, Loren, tell us about the promotion that you guys are running right now.
Yeah, so one of the challenges we've had is obviously we can't do book signings at the moment, which is why we're doing this call. And so Krista and I kind of have worked out a plan. We have books that are signed by both of us that are ready to ship. And we actually set up a seller page on Amazon to sell those books. And if you order in the next 24 hours, we are selling them at a 40% discount. So they're selling for $30, which is less than the retail price of the unsigned books. So, but you have to act now. Operators are standing by. And I don't know, did we post I don't know if we posted the URL. I think I saw it go up on chat. But if you go to the book's website, lasttrialoftboonpickens.com, there's a button at the top that says order now, and it'll take you to the page, and we will get those books shipped out.
Perfect. Just a couple of questions from the Peanut Gallery. And if you have any others, please just chime in or feel free to throw them in the chat if you're feeling shy. Jay is being Jay. He says, do you think Boone ever got tired of the constant comparisons of him, Abraham Lincoln, and Ronald Reagan?
Jay, given that you were the one who always made those comparisons and made sure that the media knew of those comparisons, I think you're probably better poised to answer that, but probably not, I'm guessing. What about you, Loren?
No, I don't think he ever did. You know, if anything that Jay set up, I think he was pretty happy with. So.
Krista, you're getting a lot of grief about the salad bar. Apparently you were enthusiastic about it at the Swiss Chalet.
I think if I remember what Mr. Rosser again is talking about is that it was an all-you-can-eat salad bar, and every time we went in there, he'd say, Krista, that's all you can eat.
Jay, do you want to chime in here with any of your observations about the book from what you've read of it?
No, look, I just want to say one, thanks to Andres, David, Krista, Loren for actually giving me PSD on some of the virtual backgrounds you guys have been doing. I will say this about Boone. Boone, with one exception, which would be me, was incredible at building good teams. And this was a good team for him to have going into that litigation. And, you know, Krista, I read the book after it was all done, and, you know, I appreciate your commitment to it. Loren, all your descriptions. Yeah, the last chapter for me was a real tearjerker. So I thank you for that. Boone was really good at, he had a bunch of different Booneisms over the years that all applied to different stories. And one of them was, when you're out there, hunting elephants, don't go off and chasing rabbits. And he was so focused on this case, so focused on winning it, making it the case. I mean, it was his singular focus at the time. And I just appreciate everybody's efforts in all this. So thank you.
We have a question from Carrie Stallwitz. Krista, did you ever get the feeling from the defense team that they felt like the case was a shoo-in for them? Like, did they discount you?
I don't know if they discounted me. I mean, they probably did because, again, I'm a solo practitioner at the time. I think that probably ended pretty early because they did take me seriously after they saw what I was putting out in terms of briefing and discovery. I also have a few that I really kind of managed to win this case in the first 10 minutes of deposition testimony because I prepared really heavily. And after we did that bit, they were not going to be able to backtrack on that. I mean, obviously we had to put on a show at trial, and that was a lot of work by a lot of people, but it was good to lock them in early. I did get the feeling that they thought we weren't going to win. In fact, we discussed this in the book. There's been a subsequent lawsuit filed where one defendant was suing its CFO and chief operating officer for breach of fiduciary duty, and they actually filed all of their jury research on this case. And they thought that the most that they were going to lose was $2.5 million, and they were pretty confident of that going into the verdict. And it was really apparent to Mike and I was standing next to Mike when we received the verdict, that they never thought that this was going to happen. So I don't think it was as much me. I just think it was the circumstances. They didn't quite believe it.
What was the best restaurant in Pecos?
Wasn't it the Red Iguana that you hung out at, David?
No, it would not be. I never went in the Red Iguana. Our lower counsel did get a multi-million-dollar judgment against the Red Iguana at some point for over-serving its patrons, but I never did go to the Red Iguana. But the barbecue place was remarkably good at Pody's. That was actually a notable place. The rest of them, that tamale place was not, Kara. Tamale place. And the salad bar was a fine salad bar, it was.
Well,
instead of 53.
All right. Let me poke around in files to see if I can find Exhibit 53. But Kara is right. It was not a restaurant. It was the home cooked meal they made for us the night that KU beat Texas in football. That was the standout meal. So no place that you could buy commercially. Kara and Kathy were the best cooks around, and yeah. And let me see if I can find Exhibit 53. I don't even know if I have it anymore. Sorry, but it was heavily featured in the book as one of our star witnesses.
Krista, one other question: where did you find the time to write a book? You are also running for office, and I know the two coincided for a while, and a practicing attorney.
An excellent question. I sat down multiple weekends in May about a year ago and just kind of went through the transcripts, and the transcripts helped a lot, because I could just pull from them and then synthesize and write these vignettes that I'm talking about, like the water bottle scene. So I spent several weekends in May of 2019 putting this together, and then I got it to Loren, and he did a lot of the work. Let's not kid ourselves here. Loren, and I still don't know why he did it, and I would not have done it, but he spent hours and hours and hours trying to figure out exactly what the rulings on the damages were to make them consistent. And I told him, don't ask anymore. You will fail at this task. But he did it. I think he did a good job.
Yeah, it was, I think one of the things Krista and I talked about throughout the process was the fact that neither of us really had time to do this. I mean, I actually had another book that was coming out, and had several other big projects that I was juggling. But I many years ago, a former Dallas Morning News reporter named Catherine Jones, who Jay has known forever as well, told me that the key to successful freelance work is that you always take on more work when you think you can't possibly do anymore. And it's something I've always learned to live by. And you don't want to pass up a good opportunity. You can always find a way to squeeze in a little more time to do something that you care about. And this project, yeah, the timing was terrible. Neither of us had time to do it, but I think we both realized pretty early on that it was something really special, and we wanted to make it happen. And fortunately, we were able to do that.
And time it perfectly to launch in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah, that was really good, wasn't it?
Definitely do that again. Well, we're closing in on the time. Krista and Loren, do you have any parting words to say before we call it a night?
Well, I want again to thank everybody for being here. Your dear friends, your relatives, you were part of the trial team. You are misinformed about Big 12 football, but I really appreciate every one of you being here. And thank you for what you've done for me and for my career and for having an interest in this book. And David, I miss working with you. I do. No one else would think to change their background to the Red Iguana nightclub during the conversation here. So
I'm sure Mike will let you borrow him for a little while if you want, Krista.
So anyway, with that, I thank you all for coming, and I'll turn it over to Loren for the last words.
No, I would second that. I mean, we really appreciate everybody joining into this. And if you haven't bought the book, please buy it. I hope you enjoy it. And if you haven't bought it, or you have read it, at whatever point you get a chance, if you can go on Amazon and give it a good review. My role here is to shamelessly beg for Amazon reviews. That'll help us out. So we really appreciate everybody being here.